Hello, this is Daniel and welcome to the second part of this character modeling tutorial series. In this part we're going to look at how to sculpt in Blender 2.83, and I'll also talk about our next topic, which is going to be blocking. Before we get started, here's very quickly one more time the character design that we're working towards. And we will be beginning to sculpt from next week onwards, so this video is going to be dedicated all to learning how to sculpt. Now, I mentioned it already in my last video, but I am planning to use ZBrush for all the steps that involve sculpting. However, I know that most of you, probably more than 90% of you, are Blender users, so I want to provide you all the information that you need to follow along. Therefore, this entire video will be dedicated to learning how to sculpt in Blender. By the way, Blender 2.83 has lots of new features, so those of you who did not have a chance to play around with those new features yet, I think that this video will also be very interesting to you. So without further delay, let us get started with Blender. So here we are then in Blender 2.83. There's lots of little pieces of information that I will be covering throughout this video in a very compact manner. So I decided to create this panel that you should be seeing on the right side of your screen now with notes. I'll be writing down all the key learning points as well as the relevant keyboard shortcuts. So feel free to take screenshots and use those as a reference. Now let's get started. Here is what you need to know to sculpt in Blender 2.83. First of all, this area here is called the 3D view. You will want to navigate in this view, so the way it works is you use the middle mouse button to rotate, you hold the shift button and click middle mouse to shift the view, and you hold Control and use the middle mouse button to zoom. This is especially important because you will be using you should be using a pen tablet, and you have to reassign the keys to allow you to, smoothly navigate just with your pen. You don't want to be switching back to your mouse. Now, we need to know about objects very quickly. This here is an object, this an object, and this is an object too. You can select them by just clicking onto them with the left mouse button, and you can deselect them by clicking outside. You can also select all of them at once by pressing A, and you can deselect them all by pressing Alt A. You can delete an object if you have selected it by pressing the X key and confirming the deletion process. And you can also create a new object by pressing Shift A, and you see there's lots of different object types, but we will be looking mostly at the meshes, and you can create your cube, or there we go, the cube again. You have also access to this menu from up here, by the way. Finally, the one more thing that you can do in this object mode is to transform your objects. So that means you can move them around, you can rotate them, you can scale them. All I'm going to teach you in this video is that you move by pressing G, you rotate by pressing R, and you scale by pressing S. There's a lot more to know about this topic though, so I have posted a link in the description of this video to another video that I made in which I'm going into very much detail on how to use these three keys as efficiently as possible. One more thing then about objects is that there are different types of objects. This is a camera, this is a mesh, and this is a lamp. You see here there are submenus. Relevant to this particular tutorial are only mesh type objects because, well, you can only sculpt on meshes really. So forget all the other ones and just keep in mind that you can only sculpt on these kind of meshes. So I'm going to make an icosphere, press F9 to open this menu and give it a little bit more resolution. And this is going to be the object that we want to sculpt on from now on. Now how do we do that? Right now we're in object mode, which means the mode in which you can select objects and transform them. However, you can also switch here to different modes, and that is in the context of your object. For example, if you have a camera in your scene, so let's have the camera selected, you cannot switch because the camera can only be in object mode. However, if we select a mesh type object, we can switch to edit mode, for example, in which we can edit all the different points individually, the vertices and edges and faces, but we can also switch to sculpt mode, which is going to be what we'll use from here onwards. So any mesh you have, just select it and go here and switch to sculpt mode. That's how you get started with sculpting. Now here we are then in sculpting. I'll move on very quickly again. You just click on on this object with left mouse button, and that's how you make a stroke. You can do this stroke in an additive manner like this, but by holding down the control key and making a stroke, you can sort of get the inverse effect. This works for almost any brush, I believe, so very easily you can get the opposite effect just by holding down control. There's a context menu that you can open with right mouse button, which gives you access to some quick features. But speaking about radius and brush size, basically, if you press F, you can very quickly change the brush size and just click to confirm. Shift F lets you change the strength of your brush very quickly. That's also going to be something you might want to use to not always have to go to these settings up here, for example. Now there's also, now that we're talking about this header up here, I just want to quickly explain how this is to be used. All the settings here that are on the left side are local to the brush. So if I change the brush, you can see that these settings are changed. However, all the settings on the right side are global. So if I enable, for example, let's say symmetry, well, even if I change my brush, the symmetry is going to be the same. Alright then, let's move forward. Another thing I wanted to point out is that all the tools and the features that you have here in the header are actually a summary of what is in here. You can see that every single feature from here is also available in here. Particularly if you open, for example, this brush panel, all these features are available here. Some of them are in here. But you will see that this is more of a quick access to what you have here. So if you want to look at it in a more spread out fashion, this is where you get lots of information. So then we have the sculpting basics covered, I suppose. So the next thing I want to do is introduce to you the brushes that I use the most. So the one brush that I use maybe the very most is going to be this one, clay strips, which is I think what's called clay buildup in ZBrush, and I will create a new file here very quickly from the sculpting preset, so I can demonstrate this brush better to you. But here you can see that the clay strips brush gives you sort of a sharp tube, a strip of clay that you add on top of it. It might seem rough at first, but you'll get used to it, and it will be one of the most useful brushes for sculpting just the fine details of your mesh. I also like to use the clay brush, which is a bit of a softer version from the one that I just showed you. This one is called just clay in ZBrush as well. I like to use it a lot, but I'm not sure about the Blender version of this brush, if it's all that useful, so just give it a shot. It might be useful from time to time. Another brush that I have actually already used subconsciously is the smooth brush. Basically, no matter what brush you're in, by holding shift and brushing, painting, making a stroke on your mesh like this, you can smooth out the detail. But you can also access this brush over here. Here should be the smooth brush, and you can see that you get the same effect. Finally, another one that we'll be using a lot is the grab brush. So what it does is just it grabs a portion of your mesh and you can push it around. I like to use it with a very large brush radius so that you can just adjust the general shape of your mesh. That will be very useful, especially in the initial stages of your project. Next, there is going to be the fill brush, which is this one here. I like to use it in its inverted mode, so I hold down Control, and you see how you can create very flat faces. So basically I use it to flatten a face and to do hard surface modeling. See how easy it was to create here this edge. It is very similar to the scrape brush though, so I think it would be the best if you compare those two and figure out which one works the best by yourself. Finally, there is the Draw Sharp brush, which allows you to make very sharp creases like this. This one will be very useful when we make folds and those sort of things, or to get into some very fine details of your mesh. And finally, There is the inflate brush, which I only use occasionally, but in those occasional instances it sometimes is very important. It helps you to make creases a bit sharper than they are and just gives a bit more volume to your object and kind of makes it a bit rounder at the same time. Now it's time for us to talk about geometry management. One of the most important things is symmetry, and you've already seen that you can access symmetry settings up here. Should you, however, by accident disable symmetry along the x-axis and modify it, you might want to resymmetrize your object. You can quickly press here symmetrize and you'll get back the symmetry that you had. You also have the settings in here, of course, as I explained before. And here you can also select which side you want to copy from. So this way you can change what exactly should be symmetrized. And I believe in this way, maybe let's take the other one. See, we can also get the detail from top to bottom, from back to front, all the things that you might want to have. Let's not forget to enable these again. So now we're working on all the sides at once. Another one that's very important that I will be using a lot in ZBrush is going to be the remesh feature. If you press remesh, basically your object is voxelized and a new mesh is generated on top of it. So let's see. One of the things that you might run into is that when you just stretch it out a lot, for example, all the points that are in the middle are now stretched out, and if you attempt now to make a very fine detail here in the middle, you see that you don't have enough points to really apply that detail. So the only way to really get around this is to reduce the voxel size here a little and to remesh it. And that will give you all the detail that you need right in that location. And so that's going to be very useful to, you start out with a primitive shape, you stretch it, and then it's hard to work with, so then you just remesh it and, all of the detail that you need will then be available. It kind of looks like a pillow. It's kind of easy to get lost in the sculpting process and just enjoying creating some shapes. Anyways, finally, one more thing is dynamic topology. If you activate this one, Blender will be generating automatically some new geometry to work with. If you make this a bit smaller, you get a more detailed mesh, but you can see what it does. You can continue to stretch this out as far as you want. You always get more detail to work with. But also, if you reduce it and brush over it, see how you can lose the detail as well. So that's what dynamic topology does. It is, however, a bit hard on your machine, so for those of you who do not have a very powerful machine, it may be difficult to use this, so I prefer not to use it too much. And you see, we're a bit in trouble with our topology at the moment. It's kind of messy, so what you can always do in these cases is remesh it and see how everything is now smooth again. So that's how you use remesh. One more time to get back to that. And now finally there is two more big topics to talk about. One is masking and one is face sets. A mask is basically, just like the name suggests, a mask. I like to have it with a little bit hardness and strength at one. So when you brush onto your mesh, you get a very sharp a very sharp edge. And what it does is basically it creates this darker area that you cannot modify anymore. So when you brush over it with a different tool, you see that area will remain as is. So the way you do that is you go to the masking tool or you press M to switch to that tool. And this is how you create a mask, just by brushing it onto your object. You can also use Control Shift and left mouse button to do the lasso selection mode, or you can press B to create a box selection. And you can also hold down Shift and smooth this mask. Just make sure that you have this masking tool activated. Only then it works. There is also a way to clear the mask, which is to press Alt M. And then there is also a menu to edit your mask, which is just press A and then you get all these options like grow your mask and sharpen your mask and smooth your mask, all these things, clear the mask and so on. Finally, more features are available up here in the mask menu, so definitely take a look. There could be some interesting things in there, like the dirt mask, for example. So that's it for masking. Clear the mask with Alt M again, and now we're going to look at face sets. If you take the face set tool here and you start by brushing onto your mesh, let's deactivate the symmetry just so to keep it a bit more simple. You see that you get a color, and if you make another stroke, you'll get another color, seemingly random colors one after another. This is not a real color. This is more of just a group of faces that is put together, and you'll be able to access it for things like hiding the rest of the mesh or hiding a specific area. The way you do that is you just make a stroke to create a new face set. However, you can also hold down Control and extend a group just like this. So you can click onto this violet group and extend it a little bit further out. You can also hold down the Shift button and make a stroke to smoothen the edges. Just be careful because this actually does modify your topology, so you might not want that. Depends on what you're trying to achieve. But that's also something very useful if you want to extract a certain area of your mesh. Now then, there's also a menu that relates to these face sets, which is the face set edit menu. There's not too many features, but you can, for example, create a new face set from what is visible, which is everything in this case, and so on. And there's also a menu up here that lets you, for example, generate face sets from loose parts. So let's say in edit mode I would add a new loose part, like the sphere here. Let's make 2 more. If I press this button here, by loose parts, they will all have a different color, and so that's also something very useful. Finally, you can also generate a face mask from your selection in edit mode. So if I selected something like this and I go back to the sculpt mode, you can go here into the menu and create a face set from edit mode selection. And this way you have very good control over the face sets. But now what can you actually do with it? By hovering over one of these groups and by pressing H, you can hide everything except for that certain face set, and press H again to unhide those areas again. You can also press Shift H to hide a specific area, and you can also press Alt H to unhide just all of them. And that would be it for face sets. It's a very useful tool. However, there's one more use, which is the auto masking features that I want to introduce to you, because that will be probably one of the most relevant things to know for our next video. So let's say you have the grab brush and you want to just shift around these volumes a little bit, but you can see if you click here in this intersection, you'll always grab all these pieces of geometry at once, and switching objects is just going to be taking a long time and it's going to be a hassle to do. So here in the global brush options, you can select Topology Auto Masking, for example, and that will limit the effect of your brush only to what is connected to the mesh that you first clicked on. But you can also do face set auto masking, and this way your brush effect will be limited to the face set. So if I click on here, you'll see that these different colored areas are not going to be affected by our brush. And that's a global setting, so even if I switch the brush, for example, to smoothing, this will still be applied. But you can also make this setting here, then it will only be local to this particular brush. Make sure that those two settings are correct to whatever you need. And that is pretty much it. By knowing all the things that I taught you throughout this video, you should have absolutely no problem following along this tutorial. And next, we'll be looking at what this is actually useful for and how we are going to use that next week. So let me switch to ZBrush then. So here we are then in ZBrush, and you're looking at the block out of our character. We're going to be working on this step in the next video, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, but I just wanted to show you that we will be using the sculpting tools in this way. So if you want to challenge yourself and work ahead, give it a try. I've posted some references for this character, for this blockout in particular, on my Twitter account, and get familiar with Blender. I'm pretty sure that you can get something very close to this already just with the things I taught you today, but next week I will show you how to create this exact model in ZBrush, and of course you will now be able to apply your knowledge that you learned today to get this exact same thing done in Blender as well. So this concludes one more time our video. I hope that you learned a lot from this particular episode. We talked about how to sculpt in Blender 2.83, and I also gave you a quick overview about what we're going to be working on next week, which is going to be blocking. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing. For those of you who want to support me, I've also added a link in the description to my Patreon account. And other than that, I hope to see you next time.